Hello, very good morning to you. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories. Sky News understands the government is preparing to scrap the northern leg of the HS2 rail link with an announcement to be made next week. It now appears the line will end at Birmingham instead of going on to Manchester. The Metropolitan Police says a number of firearms officers have handed in their weapons after one of their colleagues was charged with the murder of Chris Cabot. Labour claim that Rishi Sunak's energy U-turn will cost tenants an extra £500 a year. Police in Blackpool have launched a murder investigation after a woman was found with multiple injuries. The victim has been named as Alison Dodds. Greater Manchester has become the first area across the country to bring buses back under public control in nearly 40 years. The Liberal Democrats party conference is underway in Bournemouth, with the Lib Dems deputy leader saying the party has a huge opportunity to take seats off the Conservatives. Well, in a moment, we'll discuss the papers with senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, Christian Kalji, and PR and crisis management expert Kevin Craig. But first, let's take a look through some of the papers. And the Telegraph, well, it says the Prime Minister could be about to scrap the second half of the HS2 railway line after a shock increase to its estimated costs. The Observer has the same story and says Rishi Sunak is facing a massive backlash from senior Tories over the potential U-turn. The Express says the Prime Minister is considering a raft of radical policy announcements, and this is all designed to put space between himself and the Labour leader as both parties eye up the looming general election. The Sunday Times leads on one of the potential announcements. It says the Prime Minister is drawing up plans to slash inheritance tax. We'll get into that one too. And the Mail on Sunday is also leading on one of Sunak's possible election plans, and they say Sunak will not axe the triple lock on pensions after being warned it would be political suicide. And this is a bit of fun. It's from The Sun. Strictly Stars believe their studio is haunted. They're demanding a Ghostbuster. That's the front page of The Sun. So, as I said, we are joined by senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, it's Christian Kalji, and PR and crisis management expert Kevin Craig. Thanks so much for coming back with us. So, a lot of the papers focusing on HS2, Sunday Telegraph, really focusing on that increase, that £8 billion increase in cost to make it happen.
Yes, so I think the Observer's coverage is more about the reaction to the news, and the Sunday Telegraph does sort of makes more prominent the reason behind the potential scrapping, not least another increase in inflation, which is set to add another £8 billion worth of cost onto the HS2 project, possibly once again taking it over that dreaded £100 billion threshold that Tory Prime Minister is so desperate to avoid. I also think there's a very interesting point in the Sunday Times, which is that actually, the Telegraph says that you could save up to £34 billion and free up funding for other transport infrastructure in the North and the Midlands by scrapping this leg. The Sunday Times argues that £10 billion could be spent on having to just wrap up the existing HS2 development contracts for that branch. So actually, that claimed £34 billion is going to come down very rapidly when you have to tie up all those loose ends.
Yeah, and the big issue, Kevin, will be that party conference for the Conservatives in Manchester. It will be a big blow for the city if this is announced next week.
Yeah, and I think Christian's right. The Telegraph piece is very good on some more of the detail behind this, articulating how fiendishly complicated it is to extract a government from major pieces of infrastructure, if that is what happens. I think the politics of it are very, very interesting, that this has come out now, pre-conference, pre-Manchester. I'm just not sure that we will see this yet, because, things often get floated. It is such a radical U-turn. The Conservative voices against it are very, very powerful. David Cameron, Boris Johnson, we talked about earlier, Tory party legacy.
There are a lot of Red Wall MPs in and around Manchester, and I think it's very important for the Tories, and especially the leadership, not to think of the Red Wall as this sort of bland caricature swathe of unitary opinion. there are going to be lots of different views on this, and it may go down more poorly than they think.
Indeed. Let's move on then. Another big pledge from Rishi Sunak, Kevin, in the Mail, and it's about the triple lock. And it's looking like he won't axe it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the front page splash is that the Prime Minister is not going to do something again as a reason to vote for the Conservative Party. But interestingly, behind the front page in the editorial within, there's a very prominent piece, which is only a politician with a death wish would axe the triple lock. And I think there's something here that applies to all the main parties, talking about the 12.6 million people receiving the state pension currently. And I think that, we talked about earlier about how Labour are holding back on its final offer because they don't want things to get nicked by the Conservative Party. They're also, the Labour Party, quite clear that to change this would be seen as an act of betrayal by millions. Okay, there are loads of younger people, and Christian will know this because he mixes with more of them than I do, and they think there needs to be a rebalancing of society. They think a lot of pensioners sitting on huge profits from property think, well, why should the pension stay like that forever? However, as past elections have shown, remember when Theresa May tried to reform social care and nearly got herself kicked out of office? No party political leader is going to mess with a triple lock before the election, and the Mail sets out in detail why. It is political suicide of the highest order.
Yeah, the government, they've actually responded to this story. I'll just read it to you. They say, we're committed to the triple lock. As is the usual process, the Secretary of State will conduct his statutory annual review of benefits and state pensions in the autumn, using the most recent data available, and we won't preempt that, and we don't comment on speculation around future manifesto comments. So that is the latest there from the government on that story. Now, COVID, Christian. Shall we talk a bit more about this?
I don't want to think about it, but it's always good to think about what happens next time. Because there will be, unfortunately, a next time. Hopefully it won't be during our lifetimes. These tend to be once a century. But there's a big interview in the Sunday Telegraph today with Jenny Harries, the head of the UK Health Security Agency, who, of course, was one of the big figures during COVID. And the headline that the Telegraph have gone with are her comments on how the government will respond to the next pandemic. And she argues, essentially, that because of what we learn, not just as a country but individually, about how we respond to these sort of crises, there may not be a need to do state-mandated lockdowns during the next pandemic, and we might be able to be a bit more liberal, like Sweden or South Korea, based on all of us individually watching the data, making decisions about whether we go and see our grandparents, whether we feel comfortable mixing outdoors privately.
Put on individuals, which I think that's what was lacking.
But the problem, I think, is that, this is very rational based on if we'd been having this debate maybe before the third lockdown, in that November of 2020, but we've all moved on, and we were just saying outside, we'd behave very differently if there was another pandemic. There's much more polarization. There's a lot more conspiracy theories about these sorts of measures. And my concern is that it's very measured, it's very sensible.
It is.
But is the country going to be measured and sensible the next time? And actually, if we moved to a Sweden-style recommendation to use your common sense, actually, would people just take the mickey a bit, and would it be ineffective?
And I think it is such an important piece to flag that, because it is so measured and responsible, and it does talk about individual responsibility. But of course, one of the reasons why people will not be so compliant next time is millions haven't forgotten the people who made the laws that we were talking about how we observe broke the laws in front of our very eyes.
I mean, and that's what the COVID inquiry will investigate. And there's so much trauma around what people went through.
I don't want to think about it too much.
That's one that we will continue to discuss. Very lastly, can we just take the Sun newspaper, because this is how Strictly stars are saying that the studios in Elstree are haunted.
Yes, and it turns out, who knew that the studio for Strictly Come Dancing, one of our most popular Saturday night entertainment offerings, are actually located on the site where historically families died of the Black Plague.
I love this knowledge, Kevin.
Indeed. Well, you know, I don't have a life, Leah, let's face it. And so what is actually happening is that the show and the channel are seriously considering spending money on some form of exorcism to calm the stars down. It's not April the 1st, Christian.
It's not.
I know. Christian, ever
abolish the licence fee now.
Ever think about heading on to Strictly?
I'm delighted to say I have a pre-bronze medal in tap, modern and jazz from my childhood, so
Well,
I would fly on that show.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News, discussing the papers and Strictly and Ghosts. We have it all here on this show. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thanks,
Christian. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.